Hello, my name is Linda Herring, and I want to welcome you to my one-act radio opera presentation. Several years ago, I began working on my master's degree at Sacramento State School of Music, and this presentation is a requirement for that degree. Getting a degree in music is a dream come true for me. I was 50 years old when I began this journey in my music education, and now, after first obtaining an associate's degree, then a bachelor's, I am now completing a master's degree. This is actually much more than I had ever dreamed I was capable of. First, I want to say that I could not have accomplished this without the amazing support of my family, fellow students, faculty, and staff. I was born and raised in Sacramento. My parents were from Alabama and had moved to California a few years earlier. After graduating from McClatchy High School, I began taking music theory at Sacramento City College. My dad passed away when I was only 7, and my mom and I were talking about my going to college and that she would help me financially. I said, "Great, I want to get a degree in music." And she said, "Oh no, I won't help with that, but I'll help you go to law school." My entire life had been centered around music, and I saw the rest of my life being centered around music. And so at the age of 19, I declined her offer and joined a band and took off on the road. My musical career has mostly consisted of being the lead singer in a band, playing at bars and festivals and fairs. After a few years, I started putting together my own bands, hiring and firing, and getting the gigs. This life choice took me around the United States, and I moved occasionally to be in cities with a larger musical environment and more opportunity. First, I moved to Seattle and ended up performing with a female guitar player. We called ourselves the Dynamic Duo with me on piano. Actually, it was a DX series synthesizer. I wasn't very good at piano, but I was young enough to not know any better. She and I created our own background tapes on reel-to-reel using a drum machine and her playing bass lines. Remember, this was before computers and internet. We had a great time and we still keep in touch. Then I set my sights on Nashville because I wanted to be a singer-songwriter and I loved country music at the time. I don't listen to it much anymore. Again, I had my own band, but this time I had a band leader. We played all over the Southeast and in Nashville and used rotating musicians sometimes every week. Many times these were world-class musicians who played with big names but wanted to play when they weren't on the road. We didn't have books of lead sheets or chord charts. I learned how to call a song just using chord progressions and brief descriptions for the rhythm section. For instance, one of us might say, "It's a 1-4-5 song in the key of G. The intro is a 54-11, and it's a slow blues shuffle. I'll count it off." I don't recall using Roman numerals at the time, but knowing about chord progressions would help me later. But even with this little bit of knowledge, there were still conversations among the other musicians that went way over my head. I always wanted to be a part of those conversations, but I didn't have the knowledge. Things like chord variations and modes were discussed, and I wondered if I would ever know what these things meant. This would matter later when I decided to get my graduate degree. I recorded a lot over the years. Even back in Seattle with my duo partner Kathy, we recorded in several studios for others. I recorded quite a bit in Nashville, sometimes doing demos for others and sometimes my own. So I continued performing and recording, but karaoke became a thing and a lot of the good gigs started drying up. I ended up with a great day job and eventually having children. I did find time for music though, but my priorities had changed. Eventually, I returned to California with a husband and children. We continued to play music at home and wherever anyone would pay us to play. But raising children was still my priority. Unfortunately, in 2009, a recession came along and we lost everything. Income, home, I even had my minivan repossessed. We had both been self-employed and were approaching 50. We became homeless for about 9 months, and I went on food stamps for the first time in my life. While this was a horrible turn of events, I'm mentioning it because it also changed the trajectory of my life in a very good way. When we applied for food stamps, we were told we might also qualify for cash aid. But if we applied for cash aid, we would either have to get a job, volunteer, or go to school. I was 50 years old at this time and had been self-employed for years. No one was exactly knocking down my door to hire me during the recession, so that option was out. And the volunteering options weren't attractive. Besides, we already volunteered prior to this turn of events. But school? I could go to school? Heck yeah, sign me up. At this time, we were staying in a motel in Placer County, so it made sense to go to Sierra College. Also, they had a county assistance person employed there that helped us navigate the system. I obtained my associate's degree in music and made some young friends like Jordan Shippey, who were going on to Sac State to continue their education. I started asking questions to see if this was something I could do, since it was always a dream of mine. And the next thing I knew, I was auditioning at Sac State singing art songs in languages I didn't speak. I had never sung art songs in my life. Originally, I wanted to study vocal jazz and composition, but the vocal jazz program had been suspended that year, and I was told by another teacher at Sierra that I was too old and that I needed more skills to study composition. I laugh now, but I believed them at the time, and so I made the decision to work towards a BA in music. Then I met Claudia Kitka, and with her mentoring and support, I realized my options were wide open. I switched my major to a BM in vocal performance and completed it in 3 years. That was spring 2015, and I made the decision to enter the graduate program. It was about this time that my personal life took a significant downturn once again. School, which was always something I had loved, became very difficult. I was failing some classes, barely functioning, but when I wanted to quit, my son said to me, "You will hate yourself if you quit." And he was right. So I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Teachers and faculty kept supporting me. Fellow students were compassionate and helped me along. I got through my classes and my first recital. And then I had this great idea to write, direct, and perform in an opera for my 500 project. I look back now and think I was either very confident or very ignorant, or maybe a little of both. What was I thinking? If you remember, I said earlier that I never knew what the musicians in the band were talking about when they talked about music. And so I wanted to do something significant with my degree, and saying that I wrote an opera would be pretty significant to me. My original goal was to write a 15 to 20-minute comic opera for piano and voice. I had come up with a storyline pretty quickly and started writing some of the music. But by fall of 2017, when I had intended to graduate, my life changed even more than I could fathom. My children were older teenagers and had always lived with me, but our landlord decided to sell the home we had lived in for 7 years, and my children made the decision to move on with their lives. My first grandchild was born to my daughter that summer, and then she and her family moved to Truckee. My son moved in with friends, and I had nowhere to go. Rent had gone up several $100s, and I didn't have the income to get a new place. I ended up moving in with my 90-year-old mother, which wasn't bad, but it felt like a backward step to me. And within months, it got much worse. My children's father died unexpectedly, and I had to help them navigate this part of their lives. And 5 weeks later, my mother died. And 3 weeks later, my oldest niece died. It was my last semester as a graduate student, and I was helping organize 3 funerals, creating programs and videos, and singing and speaking. I don't know how I did it. The final slam was that I was going to be without a place to live again in a very short amount of time. I got through everything except my final project. My intention was to complete it within a semester or 2, but I felt broken. And then the pandemic came along, and the theme of my opera wasn't appropriate anymore. It's about a patient who is diagnosed with a new and deadly disease, and oh, it's a comedy. So I set out to write something different, but nothing ever stuck. Finally, in 2021, I decided to go ahead with the original theme. However, because of the pandemic, there was no guarantee that a live performance would be possible. And so I decided to do something different. I would record headshots of myself performing each of the parts in various costumes and voices, and then edit it into boxes on the screen. I had no experience in any of this, but that hadn't stopped me before. Meanwhile, I was trying to communicate with the Office of Graduate Studies, but by the time I got information from them, it was too late to register for spring 2022. Unfortunately, when I registered for fall 2022, I had passed the 7-year limit on completing a graduate degree and had to take some classes again. By this time, I had moved 150 miles away in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and in good weather, it's at least a 3-hour drive. But I wasn't ready to give up. I wanted this degree. And so I drove down weekly to my 201 graduate class and to meet with Claudia. I missed a few weeks due to the pass on I-80 being closed, but I did it. As soon as Claudia and I started working together at the beginning of fall 2022, she brought up the idea of turning the opera into a format like an old-time radio show. It sounded fascinating to me, and again, I decided to do something in which I had no experience. I had never written any significant spoken parts, nor edited as much as this project had required. I had to rely on many of the things I learned at Sac State, using Sibelius, Audacity, Ableton, as well as the theory and composition skills I acquired. My time in opera helped me to develop a comedic storyline. My main objective was to write something that would cause people to chuckle a little. I think, like many of you and other performers and artists, I just want people to be able to step out of their lives for a minute, to laugh a little, to remember something nostalgic, maybe to give them a little hope. That's it. I didn't think about making a moral statement. I just wanted to keep things simple and easy to reproduce. There are only 6 characters and one set, a hospital room. It is written for piano and voice. I wrote all the music in Sibelius. I love using Sibelius and use it often in composing and teaching. For instance, if I have a student that wants to play a particular piece of music, but I can't find something simple enough for them, I can recreate my own arrangement in Sibelius. I have transposed vocal pieces for others. This is a program I would never have used if it weren't for my education. I came up with the storyline just by daydreaming, which is something I really enjoy doing. I imagined the settings and the characters, and the most important one of which was the patient. But as the project developed, she took on a lesser role. In the beginning, the hospital administrator, Nurse Verhaas, wasn't going to have much of a role, but her part grew bigger, and so we see her evolve a little and become more human. She ended up with 2 songs and becoming a bigger part of the overall story. When I began writing the music, I started with my usual process. I played some chords for the piano and started humming a melody. Sometimes the words come before that, and sometimes after. I've been doing this most of my life. However, now I had the goal of writing all of the piano accompaniment myself rather than just chords, and this is where my education came in. I still struggled at times to figure out the chord progressions and to use the correct notes in the chords, and sometimes I just started writing the accompaniment with what sounded good. But I've come a long way in this process because of my education. As Claudia and I started working together this semester, we would sit at her piano and work out some areas in which I was struggling. She would help me rearrange some chords that didn't sound right, advise me on transitions and arrangements as needed, and just offer general overall support. When we were ready to start recording, a few previous and current students stepped in to help. Sarah C. loaned me pencil mics for recording Claudia's piano and showed me how to place them. A few of Claudia's students volunteered to perform a few of the parts. Chris Harris, a current graduate student, loaned me his MacBook when it turned out that my laptop wasn't doing the job. It really does take a village, and they all helped me tremendously. Unfortunately, the production stretched out to the end of the semester, and a few students had to move on. So I took on one of the nurses' roles, my brother took on the other nurse's role, and my daughter generously accepted my offer to perform the patient's role. During the semester, we had turned Claudia's office into a recording studio. She performed all of the piano parts in her office and also recorded the narrator part. One of her students, Ryan Antillon, graciously took on the role of the doctor. My brother lives in Seattle, and so I had to send piano parts and practice vocals to him via email. He recorded his parts in his home and returned them. My daughter recorded her parts in her home, and I recorded my parts in my home. Then I had to edit it all together. I had never done a project like this in audio editing, and it has been a huge learning experience. The performers were not in the same room when recording, and so I wasn't certain about how it would ultimately flow. But they've all been professional and have done a great job of interpreting my instructions. I also used a few sound effects like footsteps and a door opening and closing, which was all new to me. I had to pay careful attention to timing these correctly. Because the speaking parts, piano, vocals, and sound effects are all on separate tracks, they had to be blended together. This meant that I had to keep volumes consistent, when and where to use effects on the vocals, and of course timing the flow of the parts. Editing the project has been a huge endeavor. I also decided to put together a visual backdrop behind the audio and also credits at the end of the presentation. The audio for the final project you see today will be in a WAV file format. The video was created using public domain photos, fading in and out, and it was all compiled into a PowerPoint presentation. I will also be making an MP3 audio file available of just the Popra, because MP3 creates a much smaller file format than WAV, but it will still be a large file due to the length of the production. The audio was mostly recorded in Ableton and GarageBand on Mac, although a few speaking parts were recorded in Audacity on a laptop. Editing was performed in Audacity on the laptop and input into PowerPoint. After I received my bachelor's in 2015, I worked for McLaughlin Studios in Loomis as a voice and piano teacher. This is something I would never have attempted prior to my education. I also wrote a few children's musical theater pieces for them, complete with music, but these were short and I didn't have to record any of it. This presentation today, however, is a much bigger project because of recording and editing. Again, these are things I would never have attempted prior to my education. Obtaining both my bachelor's and master's degrees at Sac State has completely changed my life. I'm a better vocalist, I've become a private teacher, I compose more complicated music, and I have more confidence in my musical career, whether performing or creating. I have plans to obtain grants in the community where I reside and to create opportunities for school-age students to perform and create projects of their own. Again, thank you for allowing me to present my 500 project today. This has been a huge challenge, but something I wanted to do. My first required master's performance was a classical solo recital. This project uses many more of the skills I have learned here at Sac State. Thank you again for overseeing this presentation as part of my degree requirements. My hope is that you might even enjoy it a little.